Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I'm going to get this downloaded a little late, but I wanted to make sure and get it to you. And guess what? I can't find my regular glasses. So I've got this funny looking little pair of readers, and they will work fine. So we're continuing to read in our book, Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And we're on the chapter called Summertime. I'll tell you what number that is, actually. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chapter 10. Okay. Summertime. And they've got this little picture. See the rabbit looking out of its hole? Now it was summertime, and people went visiting. Sometimes Uncle Henry or Uncle George or Grandpa came riding out of the big woods to see Pa, and Ma would come to the door and ask how all the folks were. And she would say, "Charles is in the clearing." Then she would cook more dinner than usual, and dinner would be longer. Pa, Ma, and the visitor would sit talking a little while before they had to go back to work. Sometimes Ma let Laura and Mary go across the road and down the hill to see Mrs. Peterson. Mrs. Peterson had just moved in. Their house was new and always very neat because Mrs. Peterson had no little girls to muss it up. She was a Swede from Sweden, and she let Laura and Mary look at the pretty things she had brought from Sweden, laces and colored embroideries and china. Mrs. Peterson talked Swedish to them, and they talked English to her, and they understood each other perfectly. Isn't that wonderful? She always gave them each a cookie when they left. I think that's okay. When they left, and they nibbled the cookies very slowly while they walked home. Laura nibbled exactly half of hers, and Mary nibbled exactly half of hers, and the other halves they saved for baby Carrie. Then, when they got home, Carrie had 2 half cookies, which was really a whole cookie. Now, it wasn't right, but all they wanted was to divide the cookie fairly with Carrie. Still, Mary saved half of her cookie, while Laura ate the whole of hers. And if Laura saved half and Mary ate the whole cookie, that wouldn't be fair either. They didn't know what to do. So each saved half and gave it to baby Carrie. But they always felt somehow it wasn't quite fair. Sometimes a neighbor sent word that the family was coming to spend the day. Then Ma did extra cleaning and cooking and opened the package of store sugar. And on the day set, the wagon would come driving up to the gate in the morning, and there would be strange children to play with. When Mr. and Mrs. Hollett came, they brought Eva and Clarence with them. Eva was a pretty little girl with dark eyes and black curls. She played carefully and kept her dress clean and smooth. Mary liked that, but Laura liked better to play with Clarence. Clarence was red-headed and freckled and always laughing. I'll show you what Clarence looked like. His clothes were pretty. Also, he wore a blue suit buttoned all the way up the front with bright gilt buttons. That's kind of the color of gold. And trimmed with braid. And he had copper-toed shoes. The strips of copper across the toes were so glittery bright that Laura wished she was a little boy. Little girls didn't wear copper-toed shoes. Laura and Clarence had tan, ran and shouted and climbed trees, while Mary and Eva walked nicely together and talked. Ma and Mrs. Hollett visited and looked at Godley's Ladies' Book, which Mrs. Hullet had brought, and Pa and Mr. Hullet, looked at the horses and the crops, and they smoked their pipes. Once Aunt Lottie came to spend the day. That morning Laura had to stand still a long time while Ma wound her hair from the cloth strings and combed it into long curls. Mary was already sitting primly on the chair with her golden curls shining in her china blue dress, fresh and crisp. Laura liked her own red dress, but Ma pulled her hair dreadfully, and it was brown instead of golden, so that no one noticed it. Everyone noticed and admired Mary's. "There," Ma said at last, "your hair is curled beautifully, and Lottie is coming. Run meet her, both of you, and ask her which she likes best, brown curls or golden curls." Laura and Mary ran out the door and down the path, for Aunt Lottie was already at the gate. Aunt Lottie was a big girl, much taller than Mary. Her dress was a beautiful pink, and she was swinging a pink bonnet by one string. Remember, that's the hats. "Which do you like best, Aunt Lottie?" Mary asked. "Brown curls or golden curls?" Ma had told him to ask that, and Mary was a very good little girl, so she always did exactly what she was told. I bet really she didn't, but that's how Laura felt. Laura waited to hear what Aunt Lottie would say, and she felt miserable. "I like both kinds best," Aunt Lottie said, smiling. She took Laura and Mary by the hand, one on either side, and they danced along to the door where Ma stood. The sunshine came streaming through the windows into the house, and everything was so neat and pretty. The table was covered with a red cloth, and the wood stove was polished, shining black. Through the bedroom door, Laura could see the trundle bed in its place under the big bed. The pantry door stood wide open, giving the sight and smell of goodies on the shelves, and Black Susan came purring down the stairs from the attic where she had been taking a nap. It was all so pleasant, and Laura felt so gay and happy and good that no one would have ever thought she could be as naughty as she was going to be that evening. Now pause for a second. Aunt Lottie had gone, and Laura and Mary were tired and cross. Cross means grumpy. They were at the woodpile gathering a pan of wood chips to kindle the fire in the morning. They always hated to pick up chips, but every day they had to do it. Tonight, they hated it even more. Laura grabbed the biggest chip, and Mary said, "I don't care. Aunt Lottie likes my hair best anyway. Golden hair is lots prettier than brown." Laura's throat swelled tight. She could not speak. She knew that golden hair was prettier than brown. So since she couldn't speak, she reached out quickly and slapped Mary right in the face. Then she heard Pa said, "Come here, Laura." She went slowly, dragging her feet. Pa was sitting just inside the door. He had seen her slap Mary. "You remember," Pa said, "I told you girls you must never strike each other." That means hit each other. Laura began, but Mary said, "That makes no difference," said Pa. "It's what I say that you must mind." Then he took down a strap, that's a belt, from the wall, and he whipped Laura with the strap. Now, nowadays, most people don't do that type of thing, but back then they did. Laura sat in a chair in the corner and she sobbed. When she stopped sobbing or crying, she sulked. She was pouting. The only thing in the whole world to be glad about was that Mary had to fill the chip pan all by herself. At last, when it was getting dark, Pa said again, "Come here, Laura." His voice was so kind And when Laura came, he took her on his knee and he hugged her close. She sat on the crook of his arm, her head against his shoulder, and his long brown whiskers partly covering her eyes, and everything was all right again. She told Pa all about it, and she said, "You don't like golden hair better than brown, do you?" Pa's blue eyes shone down at her, and he said, "Well, Laura, my hair's brown." She had not thought about that. Pa's hair was brown, and his whiskers were brown, and she thought brown was a lovely color. But she was still glad that Mary had to gather all those chips. In the summer evenings, Pa did not tell stories or play the fiddle. Summer days were long, and he was tired after he'd worked all day so hard in the field. Ma was busy too. Laura and Mary helped her weed the garden, and they helped her feed the calves and the hens. They gathered the eggs and helped her make cheese. When the grass was tall and thick in the woods and the cows were giving plenty of milk, that was the time to make cheese. Somebody must kill a calf, for cheese could not be made without rennet. And rennet is the lining of a young calf's stomach. The calf must not be very old, so that it's never eaten anything but milk. Laura was afraid that Pa must kill one of the little calves in the barn. They were so sweet. One was fawn-colored and one was red. And her hair was so soft and their large eyes so wondering. Laura's heart beat faster when Ma talked to Pa about making cheese. But Pa would not kill either of his calves because they were heifers. That means they were girls, and they would grow into be cows. He went to Grandpa's and to Uncle Henry's to talk about the cheese making, and Uncle Henry said he would kill one of his calves. There would be enough rennet for Aunt Polly and Grandma and Ma. So Pa went again to Uncle Henry's and came back with a little piece of the little calf's stomach. It was like a piece of soft grayish white leather, all ridged and rough on one side. When the cows were milked at night, Ma set the milk away in pans. In the morning, she skimmed off the cream to make butter later. Then, when the morning milk had cooled, she mixed it with the skim milk and set it all on the stove to heat. So one batch of milk, she took the cream off, and the second batch, she left it on. A bit of rennet, that lining of the stomach, tied in a cloth, was soaking in warm water. When the milk was heated enough, Ma squeezed every drop of water from the rennet into the cloth, and then she poured the water into the milk. She stirred it well and left it in a warm place by the stove. In a little while it was thickened into a smooth, quivering mass. With a long knife, Ma cut this mass into little squares and let it stand while the curd separated from the whey. Then she poured it all into a cloth, and the thin yellowish whey, that's very much like water, drained out. When no more whey dripped from the cloth, Ma emptied the curd into a big pan and she salted it, turning and mixing well. Laura and Mary were always there, helping all they could. I'm going to show you a picture of Laura helping Ma. See? They love to eat bits of curd. So curd is the solid part that turns into the cheese. It squeaked in their teeth. Under the cherry tree outside the back door, Pod put up a board to press the cheese on. He had cut 2 grooves the length of the board. So that's like little trench and laid the board on the blocks, one a little higher than the other. Under the lower end stood an empty pail. Ma put her wooden cheese hoop on the board and spread a clean wet cloth all over the inside of it and filled it, heaping full of chunks of salted curd. She covered this with another clean wet cloth and laid it on top of a round board, cut small enough to go inside of a cheese hoop. Then she lifted a heavy rock and put it on top of the board. All day long the round board settled slowly under the weight of the rock, and whey pressed out and ran down the grooves of the board into the pail. Next morning, Ma would take out the round pail cheese, as large as a milk pan. Then she made more curd and filled the cheese hoop again. Every morning she took a new cheese out of the press and trimmed it smooth. She sewed a cloth tightly around it and rubbed the cloth all over with fresh butter. Then she put the cheese on a shelf in the pantry. Every day she wiped every cheese carefully with the wet cloth. Then she rubbed it all over with fresh butter once more and laid it on the other side, its other side. After a great many days, the cheese was ripe, and there was a hard rind all over it. That means that it was done. It was going to taste really good. Then Ma wrapped each cheese in paper and laid it away on a high shelf. There was nothing more to do but to eat it. Laura and Mary liked cheese making. They liked to eat the curd that squeaked in their teeth, and they liked to eat the edges Ma cut off the big round cheeses to make them smooth before she sewed it up in the cloth. Ma laughed at them for eating green cheese. Green is what they called it when it wasn't ripe. The moon is made of green cheese, some people said, she told them. Did you ever hear that? I did when I was a little girl. And I believed it. And I thought that there was a man that lived on the moon and that he would eat that cheese and eat that cheese that the moon was made up till there was just a little sliver of a moon. And then it would come back and there'd be a big full moon and he'd start eating it again. The new cheese did look like the round moon when it came up behind the trees, but it was not green. It was yellow, like the moon. It's green, Ma said, because it isn't ripe yet. When it's cured and ripened, it won't be green cheese. Is the moon really made of green cheese? Laura asked, and Ma laughed. I think people say that because it looks like green cheese, she said. But appearances are deceiving. They can fool you. Then, while she wiped all the green cheeses and rubbed them with butter, she told them about the dead, cold moon that is like a little world on which nothing grows. The first day Ma made cheese, Laura tasted the whey. She tasted it without saying anything to Ma, and when Ma turned around and saw her face, she laughed. That night, while she was washing the supper dishes and Mary and Laura were wiping them, Ma told Pa that Laura had tasted the whey and didn't like it. You wouldn't starve to death on Ma's whey like old Grimm's did on his wife's, Pa said. Laura begged him to tell her the story about old Grimm's. So, though Pa was tired, he took his fiddle out of the box and played a song and sang for Laura. Old Grimm's is dead, that good old man, we never shall see him any more. He used to wear an old gray coat, all buttoned down before. Old Grimm's wife made skim milk cheese, old Grimm's he drank the whey. There came an east wind from the west and blew old Grimm's away. There you have it, said Pa. She was a mean, tight-fisted woman. If she hadn't skimmed all the milk, a little cream would have been left to run with the whey, and old Grims might have staggered along. But she skimmed off every bit of cream, and poor old Grims got so thin the wind blew him away, plumb starved to death. Then Pa looked at Ma and said, "Nobody'd starve to death when you were around, Carolyn." "Well, no," Ma said. "No, Charles, not if you were there to provide for us." Pa was pleased. It was all so pleasant, and the doors and windows wide open to the summer evening, the dishes making little cheerful sounds together as Ma washed them and Mary and Laura wiped, and Pa putting away the fiddle and smiling and whistling softly to himself. After a while he said, "I'm going over to Henry's tomorrow morning, Carolyn, to borrow his grubbing hoe. Those sprouts are getting waist high around the stumps in the wheat field. A man just has to keep everlasting at it, or the woods will take the place back." So when it said sprouts, those are little trees trying to come up. Early next morning he started to walk to Uncle Henry's, but before long he came hurrying back, hitched his horses to the wagons, threw in his axe and 2 wash tubs, the wash boiler, and all the pans and buckets that there were. "I don't know if I'll need 'em all, Carolyn," he said, "but I'd hate to want 'em if I needed 'em." "Oh, what is it? What is it?" Laura asked, jumping up and down with excitement. "Pa's found a bee tree," Ma said. "Maybe he'll bring us some honey." It was noon before Pa came home. Laura had been watching for him, and she ran out to the wagon as soon as it stopped by the barnyard, but she could not see into it. It was too tall. Pa called, "Carolyn, if you come take this pail of honey, I'll go unhitch." Ma came to the wagon a little disappointed. She said, "Well, Charles, even a pail of honey is something." Then she looked into the wagon, she threw up her hands, and Pa laughed. All the pails and buckets were heaping full of dripping golden honeycomb. Both tubs were piled full, and so was the wash boiler. Pa and Ma went back and forth, carrying the 2 loaded tubs and the wash boiler and all the buckets and pails to the house. Ma heaped a plate high of the golden pieces and covered the rest neatly with cloths. For dinner they all had as much of the delicious honey as they could eat, and Pa told them how he found the bee tree. "I didn't take my gun," he said, "because I wasn't hunting. And now it's supper, there isn't much danger now that it's summer, there isn't much danger of meeting trouble. Panthers and bears are so fat this time of year they're lazy and good-natured. Well, I took a shortcut through the woods, and I nearly ran into a big bear. Came around a clump of underbrush, and there he was, not far from me at all. He looked around at me, and I guess he saw I didn't have a gun. Anyway, he didn't pay any attention to me. He was standing at the foot of a big tree. The bees were buzzing all around him. They couldn't sting him because of his thick fur, and he kept brushing them away from his head with one paw. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You see it? I stood there watching him, and he put the other paw in the hole and in the tree, and it came out dripping with honey. He licked the honey off his paw and reached in for more. By that time I'd found me a club. I wanted the honey myself, so I made a great racket, really loud, banging the club against a tree and yelling. The bear was so fat and so full of honey, he just dropped on all fours and waddled off among the trees. I chased him some distance, and he got going fast away from the bee tree. And then I came back for the wagon. Laura asked him how he got the honey away from the bees. That was easy, Pa said. I left the horses back in the woods where they wouldn't get stung, and I chopped the tree down and split it open. Didn't the bees sting you? No, said Pa. Bees never sting me. The whole tree was hollow and filled from the top to the bottom with honey. The bees must have been storing honey there for years. Some of it was old and dark, but I guess I got enough good clean honey to last for a long time. Laura was sorry for the poor bees. She said, they worked so hard and now they won't have any honey. But Pa said there was lots of honey left for the bees, and there was another large hollow tree nearby into which they could move. He said it was time they had a clean new home. They would take the old honey he had left in the old tree and make it into fresh new honey and store it in their new house. They would save every drop of spilled honey and put it away, and they would have plenty of honey again long before winter came. Well, that is kind of cool. They're getting more and more things stored away so that they'll have enough. They've been making butter, and they made cheese. Now they have honey, and they get to have visitors. All sounds so nice. Well, I'll tell you something I did yesterday. I made boysenberry blueberry pie filling, and I've got it canned in jars, ready for us whenever we want, maybe this winter too. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to tell you I love you, I really do. But even more importantly, God loves you, and He always will. Bye-bye.